when a grieving black mother takes a job landscaping for a wealthy family in Arizona, she never expects to change the life of the child she meets, or expose one of the biggest medical scandals in the country. But when her past collides with the present, secrets unravel, and a powerful alliance is born. What began as a simple act of kindness becomes a fight for justice, healing, and the truth behind a little girl's stolen sight. The wind rustled through the dry heat of early summer as Dana Whitaker stood motionless beneath the edge of her sprawling Arizona estate. From the shaded patio, her eyes locked on an unfamiliar moment taking shape across the yard. A black woman, clad in dusty jeans and worn gloves, gently guiding a spoon to her daughter's mouth. Dana's daughter, Riley, just 9 years old, laughed, truly laughed, for the first time since the fire. The woman's name was Simone Carter, a landscaping contractor hired just 2 weeks ago. But today, she wasn't pulling weeds or hauling stones. She was crouched beside Riley near the small koi pond, describing the colors of the lilies in a soft, lyrical tone that somehow reached where Donna's voice could not. That laughter, light, effortless, unburdened, cut through Dana like a blade. Because since the day Riley lost her vision in that house fire, Donna hadn't heard a sound like it. She hadn't even dared to hope for it. She stayed in the shadows, unseen, her designer sandals still covered in specks of dust from the construction zone. She told herself she'd only come to check on the renovation progress. But now, she couldn't move, couldn't speak, couldn't look away. Riley reached out suddenly and touched Simone's face with a sense of certainty that defied her blindness. "What does orange feel like?" the girl asked. Simone smiled, brushing a curl behind her ear. "It feels like the warmth on your cheek when the sun rises," she said. "Bright, bold, and a little wild." Dana's throat tightened. Her chest, already heavy with guilt, now swelled with something harder to name. She had survived that night. The flames spared her body, but not her spirit. Since then, she'd taken refuge in silence, hiding behind business meetings, security gates, and layers of performance. But watching Simone, watching Riley trust this stranger so easily, it made her feel both invisible and exposed. There was something else simmering beneath the surface, an unease that she didn't want to admit. Simone was a stranger, a black woman in a white neighborhood, a contractor, not a caregiver, and yet she was here, nurturing her daughter with a gentleness that Dana hadn't been able to summon in months. This wasn't just about guilt. It was about the discomfort of being outshined in the one role Dana had left, mother. As she turned back toward the house, Dana's mind spun. Who was this woman? What kind of pain did she carry? And how had she walked through Dana's gates only to unlock something so long buried within Riley? The questions lingered long after the door shut behind her. The truth, she would come to learn, was far more complicated than she could imagine. Because Simone Carter wasn't just someone trying to survive. She'd arrived for a reason, and the storm she brought would shake the foundation of everything Dana once believed. Before the fire, Dana Whitaker was many things: an award-winning architect, a single mother who managed to juggle late-night design reviews with morning school drop-offs, and a woman who built entire communities from the ground up. But after that one tragic night, none of those titles mattered. Not to her. Not to Riley. It was supposed to be a quiet evening, a frozen pizza, a silly dance-off in the kitchen, then an early bedtime. The spark started in the old wiring above the laundry room, small, silent, unseen. By the time Dana smelled the smoke, it was already too late. She got Riley out, but not before the smoke took her daughter's sight. Physically, Dana walked away with only a sprained wrist, but inside, she was gutted. The guilt was relentless. If she hadn't taken that last work call, if she'd fixed the wiring instead of putting it off, if she'd just done one thing differently, Riley might still be able to see. Instead, the house was gone. Her daughter's vision was gone. And Dana. She checked out emotionally, retreating into silence and structure. Grief gave her a manual: protect Riley, provide what she needs, keep everything sterile and efficient. That meant top specialists, private tutors, state-of-the-art accessibility tools, everything except what Riley wanted most: her mother's presence. Dana tried, but every time she looked into her daughter's eyes, now blank, always searching, she saw fire and failure, so she buried herself in work. The Scottsdale development needed her oversight. The environmental sustainability pitch had to be perfect. There was always an excuse. And slowly, invisibly, a chasm opened between mother and child. She replaced connection with control. Every moment of Riley's day was scheduled, managed by caretakers and consultants. Dana justified it by telling herself that structure would help Riley adapt. But beneath the surface, she knew the truth. She was hiding behind logistics because she couldn't face her own grief. What made it worse was Riley's silence. She stopped asking for story time, for hugs, even for Dana to sit next to her during meals. And Dana, ashamed, let it happen. Their home grew colder, quieter, more like a showroom than a place where a child laughed and played. Then Simone Carter showed up. At first, Dana barely noticed her. Another contractor, just here to build an outdoor sensory path for Riley. But the woman lingered after hours, not out of laziness, but because Riley asked her to stay. She told stories. She sang quietly while planting rosemary. She didn't just work in the garden. She transformed it into a place where Riley could feel color, taste sound, and finally smile again. It was infuriating. And it was awakening. Why did her daughter trust Simone so easily? Why did Riley light up when Simone described the feel of lavender or the sound of bees dancing over thyme? Dana found herself watching from windows, struggling with emotions that tangled together: envy, admiration, and something far more uncomfortable: inadequacy. Underneath it all was something even more painful. Dana realized she had begun to measure her worth by control, not connection, and that Simone's quiet strength, her ability to be present without judgment, revealed everything Dana had failed to offer. But there was another truth Dana couldn't ignore. Simone wasn't just good with Riley. She was navigating a minefield, showing care and leadership in a space where, historically, people like her were not expected or welcomed. A black woman, working class, navigating an affluent, mostly white neighborhood, choosing kindness over confrontation. And Dana, for all her guilt, had never questioned why it took Simone twice as much grace to be accepted in a space Dana had inherited by default. The fire may have taken Riley's sight, but it stripped Dana bare, and as the summer days passed, her perfectly structured world felt more and more like ash, fragile, weightless, and waiting for the wind to expose what lay beneath. She just didn't know yet that Simone's presence wasn't an accident, and the healing Riley had begun was part of something far bigger, far more complicated than Dana could imagine. 3 days after Riley skipped her therapy session without explanation, Dana Whitaker sat in her office, staring blankly at a half-finished blueprint on her drafting tablet. The lines were perfect. The lighting was right. But her focus kept drifting back to the garden, to Riley, and most of all, to Simone Carter. The woman had quietly inserted herself into their lives, first with flowers and mulch, then with stories and lullabies. And now, Riley asked for her daily, trusted her, smiled with her. Dana felt like a ghost in her own home. That night, Dana made a decision she didn't want to admit, not even to herself. She opened her laptop and typed into the private portal used by her company's security vendor. It wasn't just for background checks on contractors. It went deeper, discreet, thorough, off the books. She typed, Simone Elise Carter, approximate age 38, Phoenix area records, all data, educational, medical, legal, employment. She didn't know exactly what she was looking for, but something inside her, the same quiet suspicion that had made her a successful developer, was now whispering, this woman didn't just stumble into your yard. 2 days later, the report arrived in an unmarked envelope. Dana opened it at the kitchen table long after everyone had gone to sleep. Simone Carter, age 37, former civil engineering instructor, master's degree with distinction, community college professor for nearly a decade, married to Elijah Carter, deceased, auto accident, 2019, daughter, Alana Grace Carter, deceased, died at age 7, cause, complications from a misdiagnosed neuroimmune disorder. Dana blinked, read the line again, misdiagnosed, neuroimmune. A rush of adrenaline surged through her. It couldn't be coincidence. She flipped through more pages. After Alana's death, Simone took a leave of absence. Never returned to the classroom. The final page listed her current employment. Independent contractor, landscape design, self-employed. There were no flags, no arrests, no lawsuits. Just a woman with a tragic past who had left her career, and everything else, behind. But why here? Why now? Donna sat in silence, the air around her feeling heavy, the walls of her pristine kitchen suddenly colder. She hadn't spoken Alana's name in public spaces since the funeral, but now Dana couldn't stop thinking about the parallels. A child lost to medical error, a mother who had vanished into labor, and somehow this woman had become Riley's anchor. It should have brought Dana comfort. Instead, it unsettled her. That weekend, she couldn't stop watching them, Simone and Riley, laughing beneath the willow tree near the west fence line. Riley was reaching toward leaves as Simone guided her hands. That's sage, Simone said softly. Smell it. Rub it between your fingers. It calms the nerves. It was the kind of therapy no clinic offered, the kind Dana's money had never been able to buy. But Dana wasn't just wrestling with personal insecurities. There was a deeper fear, an unspoken tension she couldn't name. Watching Simone so effortlessly step into Riley's world, she began to wonder if this wasn't just about healing. What if there was a motive? What if this connection wasn't entirely innocent? The doubt took root fast. It twisted itself around Dana's guilt, around her loss of control. Late one night, she scrolled back through the report, tracing Simone's timeline. That's when she noticed something else. The name of the physician listed in Alana's autopsy report, Dr. Felix Harrow. It was the same neurologist who had first examined Riley after the fire. Dana's blood ran cold. She pulled up the old file from Riley's diagnosis. The name was there again. Harrow. The man had declared Riley's vision loss permanent. No further investigation, no second opinion, just a file, a closed door. She'd trusted it, moved on, but Simone hadn't. Dana started digging, articles, reviews, lawsuits. Buried in legal archives, she found something. A settled malpractice case involving pediatric neurocare. The plaintiff's name was redacted, but the timeline matched. So did the symptoms. Suddenly, this wasn't just about a woman with a past. This was about a system with secrets. And Dana, for the first time, realized she may have unknowingly played a role in helping cover them up. She remembered what Riley had said a few nights ago, after Dana had awkwardly tried to read her a bedtime story. "I like the way Simone reads. She sounds like she believes the words." It was innocent, but it hurt more than anything Riley had ever said. Dana stood alone in the hallway, her hand resting on the closed door to her daughter's room. She didn't open it. Instead, she went downstairs, grabbed the report, and walked into her home office. The blueprint she'd abandoned earlier still glowed faintly on her screen. Donna shut the laptop and pushed it aside. She now had different plans to draw. Not walls, not skylines, but questions. Who was Dr. Harrow, really? Why had no one challenged his conclusions? And most of all, how had a grieving mother ended up here, in her garden, healing Dana's child with nothing but her voice and her pain? Whatever this was, it wasn't random, and it wasn't over. Dana couldn't sleep. The glow of the outdoor lanterns filtered through the tall bedroom windows, casting long shadows across the room. But it wasn't the light that kept her awake. It was the timeline, the unmistakable thread running through Simone's tragedy and her own. Dr. Felix Harrow. The name echoed in Dana's head like a warning bell. The neurologist she had once trusted, the man who had told her, with calm detachment, that Riley's optic nerves were irreparably damaged. No further scans, no second opinion. He had closed the door, and Dana, still drowning in smoke and guilt, hadn't argued. Now that same doctor was linked to another child, Alana Carter, Simone's daughter, a misdiagnosed condition, a preventable death, settled, sealed, forgotten, but not by Simone. The next morning, Dana canceled all her meetings. She couldn't sit through design pitches or sustainability reports, not while this storm brewed right beneath her roof. By noon, she found Simone kneeling in the garden, trimming rosemary with slow, deliberate care. Riley sat nearby, humming softly, her fingers running over braille labels Simone had attached to each plant. Dana watched them from the porch, her pulse thudding like a drumbeat. Then she stepped forward. "I need to talk to you," she said. Her voice was firmer than she expected. Simone looked up, surprised, but not startled. She wiped her hands on her jeans and stood. "Of course." Inside, alone. Simone followed her into the sunroom. Dana closed the door, then placed the thick manila envelope on the table between them. "I know who you are," Dana said, "and I know what happened to your daughter." A flicker of pain passed across Simone's face, but she didn't flinch. "Then you also know why I'm here." The air between them thickened. Dana searched Simone's face for signs of guilt, for cracks in the calm. "You got close to my daughter," Donna said, "without telling me any of this. You knew who I was. You knew who my doctor was." Simone exhaled, slow and controlled. "I didn't come here to manipulate you, Dana. I came here because I had to know if he was still doing it." "Doing what?" "Misdiagnosing, experimenting, hiding behind his lab coat while children suffered." The words hit like thunder. Simone continued, her voice low. "Alana didn't have what he said she did. I spent a year believing she was dying of something untreatable. But she wasn't. I only found out after I pushed for a second review. Too late." Dana's hands tightened into fists. "I tried everything," Simone said. "The Board of Medicine, lawyers, the journalists, but no one listened. Or they listened just long enough to decide it was too risky, too expensive." Dana swallowed hard. The picture was becoming clearer now. Simone hadn't stumbled into their lives. She had mapped her way there, followed the scent of injustice right back to Harrow's doorstep. "But why my daughter?" Dana's voice cracked. "Why not go to the police?" "I tried," Simone said. "But when Harrow settled the case, everything was locked under confidentiality. I had no proof, just grief. And now, I have you." Dana froze. "I've been watching Riley," Simone said softly. Not to hurt her, to see if the same patterns were there. The rush diagnosis, the lack of follow-up, the convenient silence. Tears stung Dana's eyes. "You think Riley's blindness was preventable?" Simone nodded. "I think there's a chance." The room swirled. The weight of that possibility, a life upended by a lie, was almost too much to carry. Simone pulled a small folder from her bag. "I've been working with someone, Dr. Nadia Ruiz. She's an ocular neurologist. She reviewed Riley's files, what I could find publicly. She thinks there's reason to believe the damage isn't permanent." Dana stared at the folder, her pulse pounding in her ears. "Why didn't you come to me sooner?" "Because I didn't trust you," Simone said. "Not then. You were guarded, absent, angry, but I saw how much Riley still needed you, and how much you were trying, even when it hurt." Dana sat down, her breath shallow. "I don't know what to believe anymore." "Believe what your daughter feels," Simone said. "She still reaches for you, even when you're afraid." Outside, Riley's laughter floated in through the glass. For a moment, Dana just listened. Then she opened the folder. Inside were notes, diagrams, comparative scans, letters from Dr. Ruiz, a possible treatment plan, a quiet hope scribbled in medical jargon. Dana looked up, her voice barely a whisper. "We'll need to be careful." Simone nodded. "Harrow has friends, gatekeepers. He's connected to research programs, funded by big donors. You go against him, you shake the whole system." Dana didn't hesitate. "Then we shake it." That night she called her attorney, not just for legal advice, but to begin assembling a private team. Investigators, medical consultants, media contacts. If this was going to blow open, they needed to be airtight. By the next morning, Dana had a list. Every child Harrow had treated in the last 5 years, every malpractice claim, every NDA, every research grant. The deeper they dug, the darker it became. There were dozens of children, mysterious complications, silent settlements. Dana saw the pattern and knew they had to act before more families were shattered. But as they prepared to expose everything, another question haunted her. If Riley could see again, if the damage really was reversible, how would Dana live with knowing she had waited this long? The night air hung heavy over the desert foothills. From the patio, Dana Whitaker watched as the house lights flickered across the garden paths Simone had carved into sensory sanctuaries. Wind rustled through the sage and citrus trees, carrying with it Riley's soft voice as she traced her fingers along the labeled herbs, repeating the names under her breath, like poetry. Dana could barely look at her without choking on a mix of guilt and hope. Inside, the air was tighter. Simone stood in the dining room, arms crossed, gaze fixed on the floor-length windows. The room that had once hosted board members and polished investors now held only the remnants of confrontation, 2 folders, a half-empty glass of wine, and years of buried pain. I've reached out to Dr. Ruiz, Donna began, her voice steady but worn. She's agreed to see Riley this Friday, quietly, off the record. Simone nodded. That's good. But silence followed. A wall still stood between them, built from different kinds of loss. Dana stepped forward. You said Harrow's protected. By whom? Simone looked up slowly. Research firms, hospital boards, pharmaceutical partners. His experimental protocols are tied to data pipelines that make people millions. The second someone accuses him of malpractice, those pipelines activate damage control. And Alana? They called it an unforeseeable progression. Simone's eyes darkened. But I have proof her case was misdiagnosed. What I don't have is reach. That's why I came here. Not just for Riley. For all the children whose families won't get a second opinion unless someone blows this open. Dana's jaw clenched. She thought of all the polished presentations Harrow had given, the awards, the praise, his neat white coat, and clipped explanations. He had sounded so certain. She had trusted him because certainty felt safer than hope. Now she knew hope had just been inconvenient. I've started collecting names, Dana said. Other patients, parents, settlements. Simone nodded. Some will be afraid, but if you open the door, they'll walk through it. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a flash drive. This has the raw files, redacted cases, treatment logs. I got it through a former nurse who worked in Harrow's pediatric trial unit. She was fired when she questioned the protocol. Dana took the drive, feeling the weight of it despite its size. Do you realize what this means? Yes. Simone's voice didn't waver. It means we go all the way. Dana took a breath, grounding herself. We'll need to handle this right. Controlled leaks, media framing, a legal net strong enough to trap Harrow and anyone shielding him. I'll stand in front if you need a face. Dana turned to her. You've already been one. That night, they set the plan into motion. Donna's lawyer reached out to a trusted journalist from a national health watchdog outlet. Simone contacted 2 other families who had once quietly tried to file complaints, but were silenced by non-disclosure agreements. The following morning, while Riley was still sleeping, Dana reviewed the images from Harrow's initial scans. Something gnawed at her. Why had the report stopped after the first week? Why no follow-ups? No optical cortex tests? She called Dr. Ruiz directly. Can you confirm that the scans suggest incomplete diagnostics? Ruiz didn't hesitate. I've reviewed them twice. The visual nerve pathways appeared damaged, but they were never tested under variable conditions. There's a real chance she was misdiagnosed. Donna whispered, then we go forward. 3 days later, Riley was quietly driven to Dr. Ruiz's private clinic, located in a discreet neighborhood outside Flagstaff. No press, no formal records, just hope wrapped in clinical calm. Inside the exam room, Riley sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. Donna sat across from her, holding her breath. Ruiz conducted a series of tests, some standard, others far more advanced. Retinal stimulation, audio-reactive visual probes, controlled stimuli calibrated for partial function. After nearly 90 minutes, the doctor turned to Dana. Her blindness may not be permanent. With proper intervention, we can restore significant function. The prognosis is cautiously optimistic. Dana's heart stuttered. Tears blurred her vision. Riley turned toward the sound of her mother's quiet sob. Is something wrong? Dana shook her head, unable to speak. She reached out and took her daughter's hand. No, sweetheart. Something might finally be right. On the drive back, Riley dozed off in the back seat. Donna and Simone sat in the front, the silence between them no longer tense, but bonded. "That's what I needed to know," Simone said softly, "that it wasn't just about my loss, that we could still stop him." By the end of the week, the journalist called. The exposé was ready. A 5-part investigation that traced Harrow's malpractice back more than a decade. Dozens of children, millions in hush money, institutional complicity. Dana knew the media firestorm would be brutal. She also knew they couldn't turn back. The night before the story aired, Simone came by one last time. They met in the garden. "Thank you," Simone said, "for listening, for fighting." Dana looked at her. "For what it's worth, you saved my daughter. I just didn't know she needed saving from more than fire." Simone smiled faintly. "You didn't fail her. You just needed to see through the smoke." They stood in silence, the sounds of nighttime cicadas humming like background music. When the story broke the next morning, it went viral in under 6 hours. News anchors called it one of the most shocking pediatric medical scandals in a decade. Whistleblower reports, confidential settlements, former staff stepping forward, Harrow suspended pending investigation, a formal inquiry launched into the institutional cover-up, and in the center of it all, 2 mothers, one who lost a daughter and refused to disappear, one who nearly lost hers and finally stood up. But the reckoning had only just begun. The moment the exposé aired, the silence was shattered. Screens across the country lit up with headlines. "Renowned pediatric neurologist under fire for fraudulent diagnoses." Dr. Felix Harrow's name, once synonymous with breakthrough treatments, now trended alongside terms like cover-up, child endangerment, and malpractice empire. Dana Whitaker watched it unfold from her office, flanked by attorneys and investigators. Across from her, Simone Carter sat still, arms crossed, watching the screen with unblinking focus. She didn't smile. She didn't cry. She simply exhaled, like someone who'd been holding her breath for years. The report went deeper than expected. It detailed Harrow's years of quietly enrolling pediatric patients into experimental research trials without fully informed consent. His diagnoses, often vague or terminal, funneled children into protocols that bypassed second opinions and capitalized on parental fear. More damning, however, was the paper trail, emails between Harrow and hospital executives discussing funding benchmarks tied to patient enrollment, pharmaceutical kickbacks, and efforts to neutralize outlier families. Among those families, Simone Carter's. The journalist, well known for exposing corporate fraud, released audio from a whistleblower. In it, a former nurse recalled being instructed to streamline diagnostics for vulnerable families, especially those from lower income or non-white backgrounds. The implication was chilling. Speed mattered more than accuracy. Optics mattered more than outcomes. The public response was swift and volatile. Within 24 hours, Harrow was suspended from the Children's Advanced Neurology Institute. A class action lawsuit gained traction, with over 30 families joining within the first week. State regulators launched an ethics probe. Harrow's research funders pulled support. His private partnerships began dissolving. His social media disappeared. But Dana knew it wasn't over. "This system doesn't collapse overnight," she said, her voice tight during a strategy call. "It's built to protect itself. We have to stay ahead." Together with Simone, she created a digital archive of affected families. those who had been silenced by NDAs or lacked the resources to speak out. The archive gave them a voice, one story at a time. They called it the Alana Project, named for Simone's daughter. Within a week, their platform had over 200,000 views and hundreds of submissions. Some were heartbreaking, others furious. Many included suspicious discharge notes and vague diagnoses, eerily similar to Riley's. The platform wasn't just a storytelling space, it was strategic. Each entry was reviewed by a legal volunteer team and flagged if it matched previously redacted documents Simone had obtained through whistleblowers. What began as a local scandal evolved into a national reckoning. Major outlets picked up the story. Advocacy groups rallied behind the Alana Project. Lawmakers started calling. 2 congresswomen issued a joint statement calling for an investigation into research ethics and pediatric health care oversight. Simone, who had once been forced into silence, now found herself speaking at town halls, online panels, even a university ethics symposium. She didn't hold back. "Our children are not test subjects," she said into the mic, her voice calm but unshakable. "And when those entrusted to heal exploit trust for power or profit, they don't just harm patients, they fracture entire families." Meanwhile, Dana was changing too. Montclair Studio, her architecture firm, shifted focus. For the first time, a third of their new portfolio was redirected to healthcare infrastructure, clinics, rehabilitation centers, family counseling spaces. Dana personally funded a proposal for a new pediatric neurology wing in Phoenix, one that would require full transparency in treatment protocols and parent involvement in every diagnostic step. In Riley's world, change looked different, quieter, but no less profound. With Dr. Ruiz's help, her visual stimulation therapy was showing results. Small movements, flashes of color, glimpses of light. Dana stayed present for every session, watching, learning, participating. The distance that once existed between them had shrunk. Sometimes Dana would find Riley curled up beside her, asking questions about shadows, about what leaves looked like in autumn, about the way the sky changed before it rained. Each question was a thread between them, rebuilding what had nearly unraveled. But even as progress unfolded, threats emerged. One night a package arrived at Dinah's home. No return address. Inside, a letter typed in block font. It read, "End this now. You're out of your depth." Attached was a single page from a confidential settlement. One Simone had leaked. Someone was watching. Dana didn't flinch. She reported the letter to authorities, then doubled her security. "You expected this?" Simone asked her later. "I did," Dana replied, "but I'm not stopping." More families joined the movement. A former board member at Harrow's Hospital offered to testify in exchange for whistleblower protection. Leaked internal memos suggested the institution had buried complaints for over 7 years. The investigation widened. Subpoenas were issued. Financial audits were underway. What started as a mother's grief had become a movement. Simone never saw herself as a leader, but the world did. When a national children's health nonprofit offered her an award, she almost declined. But Dana convinced her otherwise. "This isn't about recognition," she said. "It's about showing other parents what courage looks like." At the awards ceremony, Simone stood at the podium, dressed simply, holding a photo of Alana in one hand and Riley's sensory garden design in the other. "I lost my daughter to silence," she said, "but I refused to let silence win again." The applause was thunderous. And yet the most powerful moment came later. At a small gathering that evening, Riley walked to the edge of the garden, paused, then turned toward Simone's voice. "I saw something today," she said quietly. "Just for a second. It looked like the sun through the trees." Simone blinked back tears. Dana stepped forward, placing her hands gently on her daughter's shoulders. "Then we're just getting started," she whispered. The road to justice wasn't a straight line. It wasn't clean or easy, but with every new name, every exposed truth, and every restored connection, Dana and Simone walked it together, side by side. The courtroom was packed. Rows of reporters lined the back wall, pens ready, cameras barred only by strict decorum. On one side sat former patients, parents holding photos of lost children, some holding the children themselves, now older but forever marked. On the other, lawyers in tailored suits shuffled papers and whispered into wireless earpieces. At the center of it all stood Dr. Felix Harrow, the once celebrated neurologist whose name had now become synonymous with betrayal. The charges were extensive: negligent misdiagnosis, unauthorized medical experimentation, falsification of research data, obstruction of investigations, and multiple counts of ethical misconduct involving minors. The Department of Health had also launched an inquiry into the hospitals that enabled him, naming 4 executive-level administrators as co-defendants in a civil suit filed by more than 40 families. Simone Carter sat quietly, third row center. She wore black, not for mourning, but for resolve. To her right was Dana Whitaker, her presence marking a turn few had predicted. A white businesswoman using her wealth and reputation to spotlight injustice instead of shield it. Their alliance had shaken foundations, not just legally, but culturally. The optics defied expectation. A black woman from the working class and a white woman of privilege standing side by side in a system built to keep them separated. It wasn't lost on anyone. The prosecuting attorney opened with a line that would dominate headlines for days. "This case is not just about a doctor who went too far. It's about the system that let him." Inside that room, words mattered. The courtroom was a theater of accountability, but outside, the real show had already begun. Live commentary flooded every major platform. Harrow trial trended for days. The Alana Project's web traffic tripled overnight. News outlets rolled out special segments, panel discussions on medical ethics, racial disparities in healthcare, and whistleblower protections aired in prime time. And still, Simone said little. She let the facts speak. On the second day of testimony, the jury heard from a pediatric nurse who had worked under Harrow. Her voice trembled as she described her fear of retaliation for questioning his methods. "When I raised concerns about the speed of the diagnostics, I was told to trust the science, but they never showed us the full data." She paused. "They told me some kids wouldn't make it anyway, that families like Simone's were used to loss." A collective gasp rose in the courtroom. Dana saw Simone's fists clench, but the woman never flinched. That same afternoon, prosecutors introduced evidence from the flash drive Simone had provided months earlier. In it, a confidential email revealed internal hospital discussions about liability avoidance and how certain demographics were statistically less likely to pursue litigation. Translated, working-class families of color were easy targets. The public response was immediate and visceral. Parents began organizing rallies in cities across the country. Civil rights attorneys offered pro bono counsel to victims. Law students flooded the Alana project with applications, hoping to help. What started as an expose had evolved into a full-scale reckoning across multiple sectors: healthcare, policy, media, even education. Meanwhile, in Arizona, the trial pushed forward. Simone took the stand on day 4. She spoke calmly, without theatrics. She recounted Alana's diagnosis, the months of slow decline, the unanswered questions, the moment she discovered the truth too late. Her voice cracked once, but she recovered, driven not by vengeance but duty. "I'm not here because I want him to suffer," she said. "I'm here because I want no one else to suffer again." The jury sat frozen. On day 7, Donna testified. She described how she had placed blind faith in Harrow, how she almost lost her daughter twice, once to fire and once to institutional apathy. "I had money, I had access, and I still didn't see what was happening," she said. What about the parents who never get a second look? By the time the closing statements wrapped, the courtroom had become more than a place of law. It had become a symbol. The verdict came swiftly, guilty on all major counts. Harrow was remanded immediately. The judge announced further hearings for the hospitals and administrators accused of systemic suppression. Lawsuits were projected to reach over $100 million in settlements. But it wasn't about the money. In the weeks following, 3 more hospitals issued public apologies. Medical boards across several states began re-examining their ethics compliance protocols. One state introduced legislation mandating second opinion reviews for pediatric terminal diagnoses. Simone and Dana were invited to speak at the National Medical Ethics Conference. Instead of taking the podium, they sat with other parents and let their children speak. Riley was one of them. With her vision still recovering, she described how she once saw the world with her hands, and now could see it in colors and movement. A year ago, she had said almost nothing at all. The world hadn't just listened to Simone's story. It had changed because of it. Spring arrived quietly, with soft winds sweeping through the Arizona foothills and citrus blossoms drifting across the walkways of the newly opened Alana Grace Children's Center. What once began as a garden project in the backyard of an upscale home was now a 30,000-square-foot facility dedicated to rehabilitating children who had been misdiagnosed, underserved, or overlooked by the medical system. Built on land donated by Dana Whitaker and funded through a mix of private capital and crowdfunding, the center stood as a living symbol of what redemption could look like, not just for a grieving mother or an architect seeking penance, but for an entire system once ruled by silence. On the opening day, families gathered around the sensory garden built at the heart of the property. It was Riley's design, drawn from memory, touch, and healing. Each pathway was marked not only by textured stones and fragrant plants, but by plaques engraved with names, children who had recovered, families who had resisted, and stories that had once gone unheard. Simone Carter stood at the front of the crowd, holding a sunflower in one hand and a folded photo of her daughter Alana in the other. Dana stood beside her, no longer needing to lead or correct, only to support. "Welcome," Simone began, her voice calm and sure. "This is more than a building. It's a commitment, a promise to see what others chose not to." She didn't speak of revenge. She didn't need to. The courtroom had already done that. What she spoke of now was continuity, equity, care. Inside the center, former whistleblowers now worked as advisors. therapists specialized in trauma-informed care. A small research wing, overseen by Dr. Nadia Ruiz, had already launched its first open-source study, focusing on how racial and economic disparities shape diagnostic outcomes in children. All data would be public, all funding sources disclosed. But Simone's greatest impact wasn't in the stats. It was in the way children responded when they walked through the doors. They didn't feel like patients. They felt like people. Meanwhile, Dana had shifted her entire firm's mission. Montclair Studio rebranded as Whitaker Civic Design, reallocating nearly 40% of its projects towards socially focused construction, clinics, support shelters, mental health spaces, and school redesigns. Every blueprint now included accessibility by default, not as an afterthought, as a principle. She also created a trust fund for families pursuing medical malpractice claims, but lacking the legal firepower to stand against institutions. The fund didn't just cover legal costs. It provided transportation, housing, and counseling. The kind of wraparound support Dana once assumed was too much, until ye learned how little most families had. At one point during an interview, a reporter asked Dana what changed her. She answered simply, "I stopped designing buildings and started rebuilding trust." But the story didn't end with ribbon cuttings and media tours. It evolved. Simone was soon invited to speak before a state subcommittee reviewing healthcare transparency laws. She didn't offer a speech. She offered stories. One about a mother who sold her car to afford a second opinion. One about a father who worked night shifts, only to find out his son had been enrolled in a clinical trial without full consent. The lawmakers didn't just listen. They acted. By the end of that legislative cycle, Arizona passed the Patient Verification and Diagnostic Oversight Act, mandating mandatory cross-evaluation in high-risk pediatric diagnoses and granting families access to treatment pathways in plain, understandable language. Other states followed. Advocacy groups called it the Carter Standard. But while legislation shifted policy, the greatest change happened in the cultural fabric itself. Media outlets that once avoided stories about healthcare fraud now made space for them. Medical schools introduced curriculum modules on implicit bias, especially in pediatric care. A new wave of patient-led advocacy emerged, fueled by digital tools, funded by crowdsourced philanthropy, and guided by grassroots intelligence. Simone stayed mostly off social media. She preferred small rooms, quiet conversations, and gardens. But her presence remained steady. One afternoon, a little girl named Leah approached her after art therapy. She had just begun to regain vision in one eye and asked if Simone had ever seen the color inside the wind. Simone crouched beside her, smiling softly. "No," she said, "but I think I've felt it." Across the garden, Dana watched them. Riley stood beside her, stronger now, brighter. She had returned to school, started learning photography, something Dr. Ruiz encouraged as part of her visual rehabilitation. Dana no longer hovered. She simply showed up. And in those still moments, no cameras, no press, no crisis, she found peace. Before they left that day, Dana placed her hand on the main dedication plaque. It read, "In honor of Alana Grace Carter." She reminded us that being seen is not about sight. It's about dignity. That night, as the sun dipped behind the ridge and the center lights glowed against the rising dusk, Donna and Simone sat quietly under the pergola they once dreamed up on a napkin sketch. They didn't talk about court cases or legislation. They talked about their daughters. They talked about the next center. They talked about what justice looks like, not as punishment, but as protection. A year had passed since the trial, but the echoes of that moment still rippled through the lives it touched. The sun climbed slowly over the red canyons as Simone Carter walked the perimeter of the Alana Grace Children's Center alone. The gravel path crunched under her boots, but inside the air felt still, like time had finally paused long enough for her to breathe. Behind her, children laughed in the courtyard. In one corner, Riley sat beneath a flowering Palo Verde tree, helping a new arrival label textures in Braille. Her vision had partially returned, enough to recognize faces, track movement, and capture light with the camera she now carried everywhere. But for Riley, healing was never just about sight. It was about safety. It was about being believed. It was about knowing the world wouldn't fall apart again without warning. Danaza stood nearby, watching from a respectful distance. There were no more shields between them, no more status to defend. Just two mothers who had lived through fire, one literal, one institutional, and found each other in the ash. The center had become more than a facility. It was a blueprint, a prototype for what accountability could look like when it wasn't built on vengeance but on transformation. New legislation was being piloted across 3 states. Harrow's license had been permanently revoked, and 2 of the hospital executives named in the class action suit had quietly stepped down. Investigations continued. So did the rebuilding, but Simone rarely followed the news anymore. Instead, she focused on presence, teaching, planting, listening. In a quiet moment by the center's dedication wall, she traced her fingers over the engraved quote from her daughter. "Sometimes you can only see what matters when you stop looking with your eyes." She closed her eyes. The words rang true in ways she never could have imagined. She'd started this journey believing the system had to be dismantled. Now she understood something deeper. It had to be redesigned from within. Not just by policy, but by the people it failed. The caregivers, the patients, the ones who never got a second opinion. That evening, a local middle school invited Simone and Dana to speak at a youth leadership panel. They didn't prepare speeches. They brought photos, sensory toys, and simple questions. "Who do you trust?" Simone asked the students. "And what do you do when that trust is broken?" Hands went up. Voices followed. By the time they left, one teacher whispered to Dana, "You didn't just teach them how to fight. You taught them how to see." Later that night, as Dana and Simone sat quietly beneath the stars outside the center, a gentle breeze stirred the air. Simone turned and said, "You know, I used to think justice meant punishment." Dana looked over. "And now I think justice means protecting what's worth seeing before it disappears." They didn't speak again for a while.